All right, welcome everyone to Imagine's first leadership conversation. Today we have three guests. We have Lynn Perron from Imagine Institute. We have Sarah Hoffman from the Rapid Fire Theater, and we have Michelle LaRue from, Michelle from Assist Community Service Center. So we'll just have them introduce themselves and then we'll jump into some questions. So Lynn, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lynn Perron. I'm the founder and executive director for Imagine Institute, and I'm also a community and workplace traumatologist. We've been around for 21 years now, and but my favorite role is definitely being a grandma. Thanks, Lana and Brianne. It's really great to be here and to be able to have this conversation, which I think is really needed.
Sarah.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all this morning. My name is Sarah Huffman, and I am the General Manager of Rapid Fire Theater here in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm a recent-ish graduate from the Arts and Cultural Management program at Grant MacEwan. And while I'm doing my GM job, I'm also chipping away at my degree. So lots on the fly, lots to chat about. Lots of things that inspire me from both of those worlds. And I think it'll really help with this conversation today.
Michelle.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michelle LaRue. I use she, her pronouns, and I am joining from, well, typically I'm born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta in Treaty 6 territory, and I am currently a program manager with Assist Community Services Center. I manage our settlement program as well as our family violence program. But I also was 8 months during pandemic, right at the beginning of the pandemic, where I was our acting executive director at Assist Community Services Center, which was interesting to be kind of launched into that role at the beginning and the midst of a pandemic. And that's certainly what I will be drawing upon in sharing of my experiences with you all today. So thank you for the invitation to join the panel today.
Thanks, Michelle, and what a great segue. I'll just jump right into our questions and then feel free to answer as you will. So our first question is, was your organization prepared when the world shifted due to COVID? And if so, how or how not? So I'll just open it up to the panel.
Okay, I'll start. Absolutely not. I don't think there's any way we could have been ready for this. In my wildest imagination, I didn't think that we would ever be shut down as long as we were. And but it's kind of a very complex question because I think it's easy to say we weren't ready for it technologically, and in terms of the work and the productivity that we do, we were absolutely not ready. We're a training institute. And we're very relationship based, which means that we were doing everything front facing with sort of service providers that we interact with. And so we were not ready. I was not ready as a leader for sure to translate everything we did online. I didn't think it was possible to do it to the degree that we have. And so I think I fought it a little bit at the beginning, thinking my Pollyanna came in and said, it's okay, it'll be over in a few months. And then reality set in. But I think culturally, as an organization, I think we were well positioned for it, just in terms of the relationships we have and the ability to have some of those conversations and to flex and adapt. So there was some really difficult pieces, I think, in those first 6 months as we started realizing that this wasn't going to go away. But then we sort of caught up to the wave, no pun intended. And then eventually sort of moved all our stuff online and started addressing some of the gaps that we were experiencing from the first 6 months. And I can talk about those a little later. But no, we were not ready.
I think I can certainly piggyback off of that, because as I was reflecting on this question, my first reaction was similar to yours, and like, no. And I thought, I don't think anybody was prepared, but certainly I'll only speak for myself that we definitely were not. And, when I think about one, I mean, service providers, we are client facing, right? Our clients are, front and center of all that we do. And also policy wise, we didn't have any policies in place related to pandemics, right, or global emergencies. And so from that perspective either, but similarly to your reflection, Lynn, was that I also feel that we had actually a lot of positives going for us that actually just grounded us and provided us for that foundation that we needed in order to kind of continue moving forward, to be flexible, to be able to pivot and adapt what we were doing while still maintaining that client-centered and client-focused service provision. And I certainly hope to be able to share some of that also as we move on through our conversation today.
All right, and I guess that leads to me, 3 for 3. We also were not prepared for a pandemic. Being obviously a performing arts company, we had no audience to perform to, and going online really changes the game for us. And so it was very interesting to come into the role because I actually came in 2021. So the pandemic had already kind of taken most of our world and turned it upside down. So I came in a little bit later, and seeing how it had affected us throughout that full year, and seeing where we could go from there was very interesting. But even then, like when things were starting to settle down at the end of July and August and September of last year, we were still in that questioning phase of what does this really look like for us long term, and do we even know if this is going to go away anytime soon, or are we fully just changing everything to online, and how are we engaging our audiences and our staff even?
Thank you, everyone. It does sound like it was a wild ride, that first journey through there. So just moving straight on into, what was the strength of your organization during this time? Like what really stood up and shone for you during this time over the last few years?
Okay, I'll go first on this one then. I think that when I talked about that foundation and some of the positives that we had in place, for me, that foundation was really around, well, twofold, I think. One is around strong leadership and a strong team that was already worked well together, and we're open to flexibility, right? Again, being client-centered and client-focused always required a level of flexibility, right? You don't always know. I mean, it's not always the same process and the same response for every individual that we're serving. And so that, I think, flexibility and being client-focused definitely was one of the things that helped us in being able to pivot and be flexible again in how we provide service provision. And then that strong leadership and teams where I think we, again, have strong teams in the sense where people feel like they could rely on one another, like we were going to have each other's back, where we felt we could have some raw and important conversations. And those were certainly some of the things that helped us. But if I also think logistically, we have one person only, but we do have an internal IT individual who supports us, which I think that having somebody in-house really helped us. Even with that in-house, it took us time, right, to get to, moving a lot of our services where everybody had a laptop and accessibility at home, and we were able to do our workshops and these types of things online. But that was certainly one of our strengths as well. And then the other one logistically was just the space that we actually have. We have 2 offices in Edmonton, so one that is downtown in Chinatown and one that is in Southwest Edmonton, but both our spaces are quite large, which actually allowed us, we did not shut down, not like at all during pandemic. And so when we moved to hybrid models, we obviously were limiting the amount of people that were in our spaces, but because we have large office space, we actually were able to continue to accommodate in person as needed, because we were able to just continue with that physical distancing. It's because we had the space that allowed us to do that. So those were certainly some of our strengths, I would say. And again, being that client focus, which I know it sounds a little bit like a broken record, but because we didn't actually close at all at any point during the pandemic, we were able to continue to provide service in whatever way that clients needed. And whether that was in person, when that was needed, we could provide that while putting in all of the, safety and health precautions in place. But then we were also able to pivot to be able to provide that virtual component as well. So those are kind of the logistical components, but then I think also the strong leadership to be able to make decisions on a dime, sometimes overnight, and then teams that also felt like they could count on one another and rely that everybody was going to be working together.
I think I agree, Michelle. I think that flexibility and adaptability have been definite assets during the pandemic. When I think back, when things shut down in March of 2020, we were the week things shut down, we were moving into our new space, which looked very different. So we moved from a space that we had a training center, we had individual offices, into a sort of one open space. And all the staff started working from home. And I think being a small organization allowed us a lot of flexibility in how we responded. So I think for the first month, we just said, let's take a pause, put everybody on a 4-day week instead, because we didn't know what was going to happen. So we went to a 4-day week. But that 4-day week was really a 3-day week. 1 day was understood to be for self-care. And sort of self-sustainability and trying to weather the transition that we were going to have to face, recognizing that, the uncertainty was causing a lot of stress. So that was good to have that, but obviously not sustainable long-term. And so that passion and relationship that you also mentioned was key, I think, for Imagine and our staff in being able to, one, rely on each other and know that we were going through this together, and the passion for the work, right? When people get up in the morning and still want to do what they're doing and still want to push through the storm to see what it looks like on the other end, and we're willing to be flexible and adaptive. So while we all believe that it's kind of, how do we do this online? We did not have a tech person. Unfortunately, not even close. So we had to learn the hard way how to put everything online, but not just putting it online, because I think there's a lot of models out there for training virtually, but we didn't want to give up some of the things that define us as an organization and that define our training. So it took us 6 months to be able to get to a place where we felt comfortable putting things into the virtual world and engaging with individuals and engaging with the content. We talk about suicide prevention, we talk about trauma, we talk about adverse childhood experiences, all things that need to be shored up with a lot of safety, even when you're doing it virtually. But I found our staff was incredibly sort of adaptive and creative and innovative in figuring out ways to do that. And 2 years later, I think this is a model we're going to carry forward definitely into the future, that we're not going to give up the virtual world, because it's been so beneficial in terms of our business and our staff.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Online has really challenged us in a lot of ways, but it's also really shown our strength and our resiliency. And I think that was something for Rapid Fire Theater is, we weren't able to cater to our audiences like we normally would. And so we took our creative minds and we thought, okay, how many workshops can we do online? How many, all of our meetings are going to come together. How do we reach these high schools? How do we reach our corporate clients that we, have their staff come in and do workshops with us? So it was really interesting to see all of that turn into online and how well that translates and how well comedy translates online, which, I'd say pretty well. But yeah, and just to time back to what you mentioned earlier about the adjusting the schedule that you had for your staff. I think that's just such a lovely opportunity to really meet everybody where they're at, because we were all going through it. It's not like there was one person in the office who was they were the only person who knew what COVID was. It was a shared experience. So on our side of things, in a small nonprofit, we didn't really have that luxury of taking off that time, and it really shows, because a lot of our folks have been really burnt out from a lot of what has happened in the past 2 years, and how we expand and grow further, and yet we're so we're feeling so pushed down by the world, and everything's kind of against us in this way. But finding those little things that we can all share together and communicate and collaborate on, and have that future that we're looking forward to, and having those big goals, and really, instead of focusing on what is currently bringing us down, what is going to be bringing us up in the end.
Thank you, everyone. Continue to be inspired by every piece of this conversation. I'm telling you, it feels like a humanity kind of moment, listening. So thank you. That'll move us into our next question. What were the big conversations in your organization over the past 2 years? What were those human to human conversations that you were having?
Well, I think for us, it started with, what do you need? Recognizing that everybody on our staff, like you said, Sarah, everybody was going through it. Nobody was immune to it, but everybody was going through it differently. And so it really was having those honest conversations about, what do you need? About what do you need in the moment? Because that fluctuated over the 2 years. We had, all of us, I think, went through this little ebb and flow of, I'm doing great, I'm not doing so great. And a lot of it wasn't necessarily work related. Oftentimes, as we know, we have personal lives, and things happen on the home front that, adds another layer of pressure. And so that was a big one. And then I think the second one for me that really helped us was having these really open conversations about what was going on in the world, and also about sort of where we were individually and as an organization situated in that. That particularly came to the forefront when it was time to, when vaccines came into play, and there was all these vaccine mandates. And then when people were starting to go back to the office, we were hearing from many organizations that it was, you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about whether you're vaccinated or not. You're not allowed to talk about or ask staff whether they are or not. And I think given that everybody has different perspectives on this, I think it was important for us to just, if we were going to show up authentically, we need to be accepted authentically. And so there's no conversation that can't be had within our space in terms of, some of the hard stuff. Let's put it at the forefront, because these are conversations that come up in the Zoom room. They come up in training, right? So we were really sort of the incubator for having some of those difficult conversations and knowing how to do them respectfully with one another and hold space for people that, might think differently, might approach things differently. And that was really helpful for us, I think, as an organization, particularly for facilitators who then, would go into the Zoom room and have to negotiate and navigate those conversations with individuals that they didn't know. And let's face it, just about everyone that came to our training came from organizations that were also navigating this in different ways. And they brought those challenges into our space. So it was helpful for us to already have had some trial runs, if you will, around some of those difficult conversations.
Okay, it's like who's going to get the mute button first? It feels like a Family Feud or something. I know. Yeah, that whole, I love the question about what do you need, right? Again, when I was reflecting on this, I kind of had two components. One, insofar as our teams and our, the people we serve. that life-work balance, you know. And then the other piece of big conversations was also around policies, because, you know, we have an organization with 70 different staff, you know, give or take, right? 70 staff who are serving thousands of clients, right? And in person, typically, right? Historically, always in person. And, you know, moving to how do we continue to provide services? All of these people, even within our own staff, right, were experiencing this differently and had different levels of comfort, even of providing in-person service or virtual service, you know, responding to the needs. And so a lot of conversations about kind of respecting and providing people just that space to be able to be and have whatever it was that they needed. So, you know, staff who were comfortable, more comfortable to have in person, those that were less comfortable. So when we talk about kind of being flexible, right, it's not only flexible in, you know, our programs, but also flexible even for each individual, right? And I think moving to a hybrid model where people are now working from home, there's a lot of benefits, of course, to working from home. But I think one of the drawbacks is that how do you actually find that work-life balance where you're now living and working in your same space? And how do you actually set and maintain those boundaries of this is work time and now this is home time? You know, so, you know, on one side, organizations could be, you know, even in talking to other EDs who felt like, but are my staff actually working those hours, right? So there's that perspective, but then there's the perspective, and I know within some of the folks on my team where I'm like, they're always working, right? Because their work computer, their work is always accessible to them. And again, now we were able to serve clients in the evenings or weekends when that typically was not our model. We were a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday service provider, right? So some of that was, you know, one, again, that work-life balance, ongoing and regular check-ins with each team member about where they were at, how they were feeling about their workload, how are they feeling about their own, you know, safety, and not only their physical safety, but also their emotional safety, which I think we don't talk about enough, right? Is that emotional safety component. And then again, on the side of policies, lots of conversations around policies, right? And developing policies. You know, do we work in office? When do we come back to, you know, providing in-person service? What about masking policies or vaccination policies? You know, one of our programs, we run a language, you know, a link program, which is a school, right? It was always in person. You know, policies around that program versus other programs that we could continue to do exclusively virtually. So all of that really became a part of our conversations. And personally, within, you know, my 2 primary teams now at this point, I'll also speak about the importance for me was to find ways to continue to connect and build that team. Because I mentioned kind of in one of the strengths going into this was the strength of having that team spirit, that team dynamic of people being able to rely on each other. But now when you're always seeing the same person because you're only 2 people in the office and it's always the same people because we're on kind of a rotation. How do you actually continue to build and maintain that team, that sense of I can count on, right? And because eventually we're going to come back in person, and now we are, but how do we continue to build that? And that was certainly one of the things that I focused on. Really, I think it was a strong focus for me of how can I continue to build team and do team building, if you will, activities and events in a virtual space. And that was one of the things that I strived hard to be able to do. And I think we had some success. You know, now that we're back in person, I actually feel that we're a stronger team now than we were even pre-pandemic. So those were certainly some of the conversations, those big conversations that we were having, you know, around our space.
Awesome. I would also agree that space was one of our biggest conversations. We actually left the Citadel. That was where our programming was. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought, hey, we don't know what's going to happen. Let's kind of end this lease that we've got going on. And then we didn't have a home at all. And we, you know, had our computers and that was about it. But the biggest conversation that we had during the pandemic and even still today is our new home and what that looks like. So we're at a very pivotal point in Rapid Fire's history, and we have secured a 40-year lease for the old TELUS museum, or the phone museum, sorry. And so during the pandemic, while we had very little programming, we had, everything was as small as we could make it, but mighty. We were also working on this very exciting building project. But I think the biggest challenge for every person involved in the organization was, what does that space look like in between this weird, everything's kind of strange right now and we don't know what to expect, and this huge dream that we had, and it's finally coming to realization, and we're in this limbo, and we keep doing the like, yeah, next year when we're in the new space, everything will be fantastic. But COVID just goes to show that we don't really know what's going to happen, and chaos can can ensue at any point. But we need to have those conversations with each other and those check-ins, and have that strong foundation. And so, yeah, the space itself was a giant conversation that we've had, as well as what rebuilding financially looks like, and how audiences are going to be impacted from COVID, and will they want to come back and see live theater, and at what point and what stages, and vaccines was a huge thing for us as well. We've had a lot of really sticky conversations with patrons over the year of, what are you doing in your space that's different from other people, and going with the trends that are happening. And sometimes masking is very big and sometimes it's not, and vaccines going away, the requirements were very tricky for us to navigate. So yeah, I would say certainly space, lots of time, and the financial impacts on our organization. Those were the biggest conversations that we've had.
To build on your comment around space, Sarah, it really made me think about the division between how we identify our work with space and just how we identify our work. To your point, Michelle, we are stronger. I agree. We are stronger, I think, post-pandemic or post 2 years of this, to some degree, because we've learned how to connect. So we have a Calgary office, and Lana is part of that. And before the pandemic, I think we didn't have the mechanisms in place to connect as much as we did virtually. And so that was a very positive thing. It sort of put all of our team on an equal footing. But because of the space we're now in, our staff will not come back to the office. They have the opportunity, there's desks and there's a space for them, but they have now chosen to work from home because they've been able to sort of mitigate some of the other challenges in their life very well from working from home. And the reality is, if everybody came back to the office, we wouldn't be able to do the training the way that we do, because some days we just don't have the space. So it's been an interesting transition, but one that has afforded us an ability to look at our work differently, and to recognize that, hey, we can do things different, and it still works, and it meets people's needs in a much better way. So.
Michelle, did you have something you want to add there in that space?
I was, I don't know where it necessarily fits, but in thinking, a bit aligning with our conversation around just respecting differences, and it was making me reflect upon the fact, we are an immigrant serving agency. So when we're talking about differences, everybody has their own unique and diverse culture, of course, right? Just as individuals. But when we're also serving diversity insofar as newcomers to Canada, a large, differences around, ethnicities and cultures, again, I think it just amplifies or amplified those differences, those comfort levels. And I would see that even in certain communities, they actually really wanted ongoing service in person, whereas other communities really did not want that at all. And so again, just thinking about that individualized, right? Whether we're talking about our staff, right? Our team members, or our, clients served, again, that diversity is so vast, and the importance of really being able to respect and meet people where they're at.
I just want to build on that because those differences, one of the big conversations we had on our team was, do we ask people to keep their cameras on or not? Being trauma informed suggests that we would, only because it creates safety in the room. Because then you can see who's in the training room. On the other hand, it sort of also can exclude people who want to participate that don't have the bandwidth, that have 3 teenagers at home, all online, and they still want to participate. So we didn't really land on a concrete solution where it's black and white, but it's one of those ongoing conversations that we've had to have to your point, Michelle, to meet the diversity of our audience.
Fantastic, thanks, Liz. And I think this leads right into kind of what we're here trying to tie a bow around what mental health looks like in the workplace. So our next question is, how do we go about changing our workplace mental health culture? All of you have talked about that to some degree, but what advice or thoughts do you have around how do we go about implementing that workplace mental health culture? Maybe I'll just jump to you, Sarah, if that's okay, just to put you right on the spot first there.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'd say I wrote this down in I took some notes earlier. I wrote navigating the crash. Go, ooh, like you're impressed. That's a little improv joke, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Navigating the crash. We just came down from a festival, Improvaganza, and it is 11 days of crazy improv nonstop, people coming in from all over the world to come see these shows and do these shows, and then there's workshops, and of course there's after parties, and there's a point in the week following where everyone just falls into nothingness and there's like no productivity, there's absolutely no like communication of like, okay, what's next, because we've all been consumed by this huge event that's happened in our lives. And I very much feel that with the pandemic and navigating how do we come out of this in a way that is balanced enough with our work-life balance and with each other, with our staff members, with the leaders of the organization, and how do we effectively look at the time that we're coming down from something, and then give ourselves nice little milestones here and there, and only make it something that we can a bite-sized piece of information, instead of, oh my gosh, we now have to conquer this thing, and then after that things, then we've got to go to this thing. And I feel that a lot of from all the arts organizations that I've worked for in my life have very much been, we go from one big event and then we have another big event, and it just continues. And it's really hard to make sure that our staff and our audiences aren't just completely burnt out afterwards and going, I don't want to do another thing, and yet they feel obligated to in a way. So I'd say that is that's one challenge for us about our workplace health and our culture, is really going through that together as a team, and noticing when others are going through that crash and lending that hand of going, hey, can I help you out with something, because we've got this big thing coming up and we can conquer this together.
Well, maybe I'll piggyback onto that. Interesting, right? In the notes that we made in preparation for this, you're navigating the crash. My 3 words that I wrote down about this one was talk about it. Those are my first 3 words. First of all, talk about it. And I think that for me, there's certainly been kind of this shift in the past few years about, encouraging, right, even the whole Bell Talk campaigns or whatever, that we should talk about mental health. So talking about, I think, is certainly a starting point. But in order to actually be able to talk about it, we actually have to create and be able to sustain kind of brave spaces to actually, where people feel they can talk about it. And again, especially in the workplace, right? It's different perhaps in our personal networks, right? We might have a different kind of sense of safety right there, but in our workplaces. And where we have no stigma. But again, when we talk about walk the talk, right, we can say that we need to do these things, but how do we actually create those brave spaces? And one other thought that I wanted to share was a shift in our thinking. So much talk in the past number of years and focus on self-care, where we kind of have brought self-care to the forefront, which is great. Like, I think self-care is obviously a really important thing. But a number of years ago, a colleague of mine, Nikita Valerio, introduced me to the concept of community care. And I think that, in my trainings, right, I talk about self-care is very much, it's rooted in a westernized concept of an individualistic society. And yet community care is really rooted in collectivist communities where, right, when we get to a point where we're saying self-care, we need to be responsible to take care of ourselves. But what about those times where we no longer have that bandwidth, that energy? Like, I need to actually be able to rely on community care. And so when I think about, this, how do we go about changing workplace mental health culture, talking about it and shifting our focus from self-care, that is putting the onus on us to always be on our game, really, right? Being the ones that are responsible for it, and shifting our conversations to community care, where we are there to actually, walk alongside, carry along with, whatever that might look like. And I think that that conversation in our society really needs to change from, again, putting that onus and responsibility always on the individual, which oftentimes isn't actually helpful. Community care, I can think, will get us a lot further, and also will provide that groundwork to create those brave spaces to actually talk about it. Those are my thoughts.
I could not agree more, Michelle. I think that when we tell people to take care of themselves when their bucket is empty, we're just setting them up for failure. And it's disrespectful, to be honest, right? And we heard this in the Zoom room so often around individuals who were completely burnt out. We're working in a very toxic environment. And then, going home at the end of the day and having a bubble bath and disengaging is just not going to do it when you have to go back to that environment. So to your point around community care, it's also about organizational care. And I think as leaders, we have a duty and responsibility to ensure that if we're really going to walk the talk, that we have to be able to give our staff the flexibility to meet their needs, however they need to meet it at any time. And so when we finished that first month and it was okay, let's get back to something a little bit more sort of normal. Some staff decided they would stay on a 4-day week, and that was okay because I knew it would change eventually. For some it didn't, and that was okay too. So I think a big piece for me in terms of creating culture was also flexibility, but real flexibility. Not just kind of, well, you have the flexibility to just work here or here. It was, some of you work better in the morning. You want to start your day at 6. If you're not training, that's okay. You can get your work done, before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then enjoy the rest of your day, because then you can sort of make that work for you. So the flexibility came in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and we had to be okay with that. And I think for me, coming from a culture of, I'm a military brat, so I come from a culture of suck it up, right? And very strong work ethic. And this is the way it's done. And this is the way you show up. I really had to do a lot of self-reflection and look at, how do I unpack this? And because I didn't think that that was the right way to do things. I think the other word that comes to mind around sort of mental health culture is predictability. So flexibility is great, but we knew that the chaos and the unpredictability of the pandemic and the ever-changing landscape created a really stressful environment, just as a baseline. And so how could I mitigate that at work? knowing as a not-for-profit, like you all are, that funding changes, we knew there were going to be cuts, which there were. And I didn't want staff to be in a place where they were always guessing, do I have a job tomorrow? So I developed a model of very transparent sort of communication where I let staff know, we've got this funding, we're good, we've got this amount in the bank so that if things shut down tomorrow, we would be okay for this long. And this is how much time I would give if anything ever happened. So I think adding that predictability to people meant that it was one less thing they had to worry about. And then to your earlier point around that connection, that was definitely a leadership fail on my part at the beginning. I thought less was more in terms of my communication. I thought I'll just let them do what they need to do, not realizing that maybe anchoring them within our organization was really important. So it took us a few months, unfortunately, but we caught up. And then we started just these informal pop-ins every morning at 8:30. And you can come or you don't have to come. It didn't matter. And consistently, everybody shows up in the morning for that 15-minute pop-in. It's short. It's sometimes work-related, but very rarely, because it's not about work. It's about relationship. It's about connecting with each other and making sure we're okay. And once again, giving everyone the opportunity to ask, what do you need from me today? And this is when I'm available and this is what I can give. Or even just to offer up that I need help, right? To both your points around having those conversations. And as leaders, I think we do have to model the way around making it okay for people to talk about mental health challenges. That's the only way we're going to destigmatize that. And recognizing that physical health and mental health are woven together. And so, you know, we need to take care of physical health as well. So, yeah.
I have something very quick to add to that point.
Yeah.
In our staff meetings, I had introduced something very silly called Rose Thorn Banana. And it is one lovely thing that has happened since we've last talked, one silly thing, and then one not so great thing. So your rose, your thorn, and your banana. And many times we've gathered as staff and really celebrated each other's roses and like really taken sorrow in your thorns and just like really gelled as like, no matter what you come to the table with, we're all here and we're all willing to listen to it, and allowing people to come forward with a really vulnerable like thorn of, I'm having an incredibly horrible anxiety week, or you know, and then just having those little conversations on the side before we get going with what we need to talk to about in our staff meetings has just really set a good precedence of like, we're all humans, we're all here, this is a job that we have and we share this job together and we're passionate about it, but at the end of the day, we're all on this earth together, and let's communicate and meet each other where we need to meet each other at.
Okay, I'm going to add a quick point here too, because it's interesting to hear kind of these common themes and common threads, because I love the rose thorn banana idea. Similarly, I had, two things. One, we implemented a standing weekly meeting with my teams on Friday mornings, which, we used to meet once a month for a team meeting, but during pandemic, every Friday. And now, of course, that's carried through. And at the beginning of our meeting, I always had kind of some sort of an opener question. And of course, people aren't obligated to respond, but everybody typically does. And again, I change it up. Sometimes it's really silly. Sometimes it's a little bit more serious, but it's definitely that point of connection. And then we had also done every second Wednesday over the lunchtime, we had a social connections room through Zoom that people could join, and we used conversation starter questions. And depending on people's schedules, they would join or not join. But just these similarities of opportunities that we've created within our environments to give people different ways to connect, where they might be sharing actually things that they wouldn't necessarily have been sharing outside of that space.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because usually when you label that conversation. Like if you were to have a Wednesday meeting every Wednesday and it was like, we're going to talk about your problems today. No one wants to do that. But if you make those organic conversations, like the water cooler talk, or, you know, like, oh, we're in the lunchroom together and we're both, you know, emptying the dishwasher and, oh, how was your Friday? Oh, blah, blah, blah. And it just really carries that conversation on.
I think to that point, one of the things that, so we went on Teams, Microsoft Office 365 and have used Teams as our platform to connect with each other. And one of the things that staff have been incredibly good at is connecting on that platform via chat. And that's been incredibly beneficial because it does recreate sort of that water cooler. Hey, how's it going? I'm stopping by your office and dropping this information off. But now we're finding that, you know, some days it's almost too much. So there is sort of that, how do we balance that now? Because when you're using multiple platforms like Clouds and Teams, and Lana's laughing because she knows, for us older people, it's a little harder to navigate all that cloudy world. We like sunshine and concrete paper. But then it's kind of like, how do we mitigate all of that information, right, as it comes at us without spending too much time looking for that one resource that I know Brianne sent me, but I can't remember if she sent it via email or a text or a chat or put it in the cloud. So, but it's a process.
Again, just the wisdom is just like, and I too, Michelle, I'm just amazed at the themes that are coming out. And I love that there's no script and you're all three of you are just kind of gathering around some of the same higher level topics. So a lot of you have talked about the next question, but if there's anything you'd like to add, how do you know your mental health programs, promotion, interventions, actions, whatever you've done have been successful or a learning? Either one is great to hear.
Well, since my mic is off, I'll go. I think it's hard to gauge success. I think you'd have to define it first. What's success in mental health? I don't think it's necessarily the absence of mental health challenges, but for me, it's that we're having conversations around them, and that we're able to talk about it. We're able to be able to bring them to the forefront and make ourselves vulnerable. And so for me, the things we've put in place to, you know, ramp up connection and to be with each other and to have those difficult conversations, the fact that 2.5 years later, we're stronger than before, we're still having those conversations, is one indicator of success.
I love this conversation as a whole too. And my theme, even in my, you know, what I'm sharing around conversations and relationship building, that's in my reflection of my word that I put under this question was ask, right? Which is again related to talking about it, you know, providing space. And I agree, Lynn, insofar as what is our measure of success, because we could go, okay, well, you know, is it around how many staff left during pandemic, how many staff, right? You know, because we implemented things like surveys to ask about people's preferences of where they're at to gauge it in case they aren't prepared or wanting to do it, you know, in a different platform. We're providing anonymous spaces also for that feedback. But I think the biggest thing is really around, again, those conversations, asking in a variety of forms, right? When we're thinking about equity, that access, right? So that everybody has an opportunity to respond in whatever way they might be comfortable to do it. Because, you know, we'll say, well, we're going to send out a survey. Okay, that's great. But what about people who want an opportunity to actually tell you more or talk to you, because that's where, you know, the heart of relationship is for them. So looking at a variety of ways to get that feedback and engaging, right? I mean, you know, maybe our funders want to know around how many people, you know, what's our turnover rate been over the pandemic, so we can track things like that. But internally, again, I think it's being present, observing changes in people so that we can also go and reach out and check in if they're not necessarily coming to us, but normalizing having those conversations.
Yeah, great points. I put two notes down. The first one is validating each other. So something that we've done a lot of is, sharing our anxieties or sharing our worries, sharing just being depressed of the pandemic and all other things. But really, if there's a task at hand that's not really coming to fruition or whatever, we can have a chat of saying, I'm seeing you, I'm hearing you, I acknowledge where you're at right now. How can we, conquer this together? And I've mentioned that a couple of times, of meeting each other where we're at, and really validating that that's okay. We are human. This task needs to get done. So how are we going to do it together? And just like having a really casual, open conversation about it, so that it just sets this precedence, like we can always chat about it. And if you don't want to chat about it, that's cool too. That is valid. Let's just get the thing done. And really just having an open conversation about it. And the second thing that I wrote down is something that I picked up from working in the restaurant industry, is starting off a conversation with, may I? And then if someone is not ready at that moment, they can say, no, I need 10 minutes, or yep, I'm ready to go. What do you need? And just like having that very quick check-in with each other of, hey, this may take 20 minutes of your time. May I chat with you about it right now? Instead of, formally setting up a meeting when it's something that could take, 5 minutes. And I find that myself, as someone who suffers with anxiety, is that's a big thing for me, is if when people go, hey, do you want to chat on the phone real quick? And I'm like, oh my God, about what? And it just like derails my whole day, because I'm just like, okay, do I need to prepare a report? Do I need to do this? How do I be a better leader in this situation? And really it's like, hey, I was wondering about that thing that we were talking about earlier. Oh, okay, great. So just like really offering that just small courtesy to each other of, hey, you've got 5 minutes so that we could chat about this, or just initiating that conversation in a different way has like really helped bring everybody down a little bit, instead of feeling this heightened like responsibility, and you just feel this energy from them that is not intended at all, and we just completely mitigate that.
Oh, I was just going to say that's such a good point, Sarah, and one that I had to learn actually. So one of the things, especially when we went virtual, it was really important for me that if I'm going to embrace that flexible workspace, that I don't just call staff, because you can on Teams, you just press a button and they're supposed to be on the other end, so they should answer. But respect, because we do a lot of work around respect. Respect is, do you, like to your point, do you have a few minutes? But following it up with what it is you want to talk about, I think is critically important when we're talking about mental health. Because if someone is already experiencing anxiety or uncertainty or difficulty in their work, right away, their brain goes to the worst thing possible, right? And so I'm learning how to pair that up with, do you have a couple minutes to talk about this, or when would it be convenient for you to have a chat about this? So yeah, that's been definitely one of the learnings, and something I continue to work on.
Thank you, everyone. Just a couple more questions. I'm going to kind of combine these last two just in the respective times. So just a little bit about you. How do you walk the talk as a leader in this kind of space? And what are you most proud of related to your organization? So however you'd like to answer that.
Okay. I gave this some thought, and for me, it's before I walk the talk, I have to know the talk. And because during the pandemic, it was such a different landscape, I really needed to know what my talk was going to be. And also make sure that it fits with the talk of the organization, which is also the talk of the staff. Because you don't want to walk the talk if it's taking you in a different direction from your staff and your organizational culture. So, and because we had to implement a lot of things like flexibility, adaptability, everybody working from home, there was just so many changes. I found myself constantly going back to what is the talk? And then setting up accountability too. I think creating an environment where people can come to me and tell me things. So just before this, just to share a story, I had a staff member call me wanting to have a challenging conversation around something I said that was inappropriate. And I used a word, and I said to her, she was very nervous, but she says, I hope you take it as a compliment that I'm telling you this. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. You know, as someone who's approaching 60, I grew up in a very different time. And sometimes things slip through that I normally wouldn't let, but in a moment, you know, you just kind of let a word slip. And she was absolutely 100% correct. And I love that she came to me and shared that with me, because I think that for me is affirmation that we do walk the talk. We talk about transparency, having challenging conversations, being respectful about different perspectives, creating space for each other to grow. But it also has to be exemplified. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is my team, our team, Imagine's team. We did a rebrand right before the pandemic, and the pandemic was our opportunity to sort of, you know, bring that brand to life. And I think the team has done it absolutely brilliantly. They've had to do a lot of pivoting, adapting, flexing, and I'm just so incredibly inspired by everything they've done over the last 2 years.
Okay, I'll go. Always waiting. I don't, you know, when I think about walking the talk, a lot of what I've shared today is rooted in building relationships, in being there for one another. And sometimes in leadership roles, right, it's like if we're focused too much on the doing, right, we're looking at policies and procedures and putting out fires, and, you know, are we actually taking the time to build those relationships, to check in with our teams? And I think that that's something that I have absolutely I make time for on a daily basis, as much as possible, and to really continue to build those relationships, because I think that as we model some of that, then our staff also see that it's okay to take that time, right? And I mean, certainly with balance, as you mentioned, Lynn, in you know, kind of cultivating and continuing to maintain, build those relationships, but also being, you know, productive in the work that we're doing. But without those relationships, we can't be productive, right? So, and insofar as I'm going to 100% agree that the thing that I'm most proud of is also my team, because we can't do it without them. Everybody needs to be on board, and unless they're feeling acknowledged and validated, then they're not actually able to be there for the clients that we're serving on that day-to-day basis. And their ability to respond and pivot to the ever-changing climate of the world, and, you know, externally and internally, it's, you know, I learn as much from each of them moving forward, and I really think that that's what teamwork is all about.
Nicely said. I would say for me, the improv community and just the arts community in general is a very tight-knit community, and the pandemic certainly, you know, unwound a couple of those threads. And me coming into the position after 2 general managers left during the pandemic, it was very interesting to come into the culture and say, hey, everybody, I'm new and I'm me, and let's, you know, work on this together. And it was very interesting to see how they reacted to that and how they respected that. And yet some folks may have had a little bit more caution to it. and really having those conversations and meeting people and having genuine conversations as me, Sarah Huffman, not me, general manager, really getting to know them as people, and then going forward together as a team. So yet again, my team, I'm very, very pleased with them and how they came out of this. And I think that just amplifies the mental health of the organization